yesterday I kind of set you up with the question, what do these people teach, believe, and confess? And as we start framing an evaluation of material, methodologies, philosophies, in those sort of questions, all of a sudden, a whole new way of looking at it comes to light. And I have to say that the way this got started, what got started me on this path, was one time I showed up at class and I was short of lecture material. And it was with all the LTE students, and we were meeting in the College of Ed room, and I ran out about halfway through the class, and like every good teacher, I improvised. And I looked around, and they had all these, you know, in teacher colleges, they love charts, right? Flip charts all over the place. And they just had done, one of the previous classes had done a flip chart thing with all the different educational thinkers. And I said, I know, let's look up what these people taught, believed, and confessed. Right? So group project here, and I assigned everyone. And I was shocked at what these kids were coming up with. And I thought, I've never really asked this question myself. And so that started me down this path. I think that kind of background leads me to be a bit more sympathetic to those who have never explored it, because it was just a serendipitous moment by God's grace that I started asking that question myself. What do they teach, believe, and confess? And I'm going to divide the philosophers, educationalists, into two groups. That's simplifying it enormously, but it works nicely with having two more sessions. And so the first group I want to look at is those who follow the heresy of Gnosticism. And the second group I'm going to look at are those who follow the heresies of Marxism and socialism. And by that I don't mean socialized medicine and single-payer health care. These are two different groups, but they are also two very related groups. In a similar way, if you go back to the 19th century, 18th and 19th century, you have rationalism and pietism. And at first blush, you think these two are opposed to each other, but really it's the same thing wearing different clothes. So in the case of rationalism and pietism, both diminish the sacramental life of the Christian, both diminish the importance of catechesis, both place the individual at the center of learning and the religious experience, both emphasize deeds, not creeds, in an approach to religion. So as we go into this looking at Gnosticism in modern education and Marxism in modern education, you really have to realize we're looking at the same sort of paradigm here. And there's an awful lot of overlap. So just as when you look at people like Pestalozzi, sometimes you're trying to think, is he a rationalist or is he a pietist? You can't figure him out. So to a lot of the modern educationalists, you think, who are these guys? It's hard to separate it. So today we're going to look at Gnosticism, and I have 4 words up there that's going to kind of keep bubbling up. One is monad, then pleroma, then Sophia, then demiurge, and maybe there's a better way of pronouncing that, but it's the French part of me coming out. So let's talk about Gnosticism. Now this first part is going to be kind of like, you're going to be going, what is he talking about and where is he trying to take me? And all I'll ask is you just kind of hold on to the wagon as I drag you through this stuff, okay? And it may not seem to make much sense until we get later on. So Gnosticism is one of the early and one of the most fundamental Christian heresies that the church has ever had to deal with. It goes right back. John the evangelist had to fight against Gnosticism, and it never really went away. Gnosticism developed by drawing pagan concepts into the Christian religion. And if any of you were in Christian Preuss's talk about myths, you'll see a lot of parallels with pagan myths being drawn into Gnosticism. When it came into contact with Christianity, it quickly morphed, adopting Christian nomenclature, a simulated sacramental system, and new revelations of Christ. In classic Gnosticism, the universe began with an original unknowable God referred to as the monad. And you'll find different terms used, but for our purposes, I'm going to stick with monad. And this kind of unknowable God is this thing out there, a unitary thing that exists in the great beyond. And this thing, this one, spontaneously emanates further eons, being paired with progressive lesser beings in sequence. So it propagates itself. Together with the source, they form what's called the pleroma. And the pleroma is the fullness of God. It's the ultimate expression of all this stuff. Now, I'm simplifying this a lot. It's hard to take these bizarre, difficult concepts and bring it down to just a quick sentence or two, but bear with me. So the point is that the pleroma isn't separate from God. It is kind of this emanation of God, so to speak. Then there's this, it emphasizes it's an immaterial type thing. So one of the characteristics of Gnosticism is it tends to reject the material, the physical, as it's a barrier to true spirituality, to really knowing who God is. Now, Sophia is not the Sophia you're thinking about, but rather it is a feminized version of true wisdom. And according to there's a whole bunch of different strains, but kind of the mainline Gnosticism, if you want to call it that, Sophia had this desire for God. She wanted to be God's wife, right? And this was seen as being bad. And you right here you see a rejection of family, the rejection of husband and wife as the natural order. She wanted to be his lover, his wife, and for this she was cast out of the pleroma. And according to one Gnostic myth, the shaping of the material world resulted from this casting out. Through her desire to know the Father, her desire to be the wife, a sin for which she was cast out of the Gnostic heaven, her desire gave birth. And it gave birth to another God, and this other God, called the Demiurge, is the God who created the physical world. It's an inferior God who creates the physical. It's a bastard God who creates the world and is responsible for creation. And this is the God of the Old Testament. Now, due to his inferiority, he's seen not as good, but as an angry, evil, dominating, violent, oppressive God. And it is the fault of this God that the world is the mess that it is in, due to the fact that he created it. And because he created, the material is no good. The material is in fact evil. The higher transcendent God, this monad God, is not the creator of the material world, but is rather the source of true spirituality, the nurture of this higher spiritual other world. And the only hope of us, the physical human beings is to break free of this body, to transcend this body into the spirituality, and to deny the body, or ignore the body, or act like the body is unimportant. So Gnostics believe that in order to acquire salvation, one has to have a certain knowledge, a gnosis, right, which must deliver a person, be delivered to a person by a messenger of light. So how are you going to know about this? How are you going to know about this physical world, or this other world?
Somebody's got to tell me.
Right. And it has to be someone who has been given that knowledge. Me. So now you can join me in it, right? Lucky you. So what we have to do to receive this knowledge is reach beyond the physical world, reach beyond the material, reach beyond the evil, dark, earthly world, the body, to that which is good and light and immaterial and spiritual. This indwelling, the indwelling spark must be awakened from its terrestrial slumber by saving knowledge that comes from without. Now, sometimes Jesus will be talked about, but it is a Jesus who awakens this knowledge. And think of that term, awakening. You have an awakening of knowledge. Therefore, although Gnostics seek salvation, it's not a salvation from sin, but a salvation from the ignorance of which sin is a consequence. The Gnostics believe that the evil creator God and his angels caused this ignorance. The God of the Old Testament caused the ignorance. And if one receives gnosis in this life, a true realization of the spirit-body dichotomy and the true destiny of the soul, then at death, when the body releases the divine spark, the soul may be free from the evil world. On the other hand, if this realization is not reached, then the ignorant soul, when released from the body, will be sent back by the demiurge into the sinful, painful, evil world that we inhabit. Okay? Now, if you want a really excellent book to read on this, Peter Burfeen has a book out, Gnostic America, where he dives way into it. And he really says that much of religion in America is in fact just Gnosticism. Much of what goes as evangelical Christianity is a heavily Gnosticized version of Christianity. So it's well worth the read. I would recommend it. So, okay, that's the heavy, what are you talking about type stuff, right? Your brain is probably going, what is this? It's, right? It scrambles your brain. So let's simplify it and say, what are the characteristics? So first, there's an importance of an inner knowledge. And that inner knowledge is the remnants of Sophia, this feminized wisdom. Okay? There is a belief that the material is irrelevant or an obstruction to true spirituality. There's a reliance on one who has received the special knowledge, as the example here, right? There has to be someone who has that special knowledge. There's always a progress, an evolution towards your true self. So there's an emphasis on discovering who you really are. So it's follow yourself, follow your desires, instead of denying yourself, which is the Christian calling, right? Whoever must come after me must deny himself. No, says the Gnostic. You must discover your true self. Has any of you watched Grease? The movie? It came out in 1977, and it took 40 years before I could bring myself to watch it. My wife, it was on TV, and my wife, we were just, it was one of those days where you just want mindless TV. That's all you would crave. And so my wife said, let's watch Grease, right? And so we watched it. And in the story of Grease, you have Sandy, right, who is this virtuous woman, young woman, and she is denying herself through through the movie. And then there's John Travolta, who is the bad boy, right? And how does the movie end? Right? Who said it? Right, yeah. She comes out dressed like a slut, and and this is her true self. And she now has liberation from her past, the constrictions that she has. She's discovered her real self, and then they just run off singing, "You're the one that I want," ooh, 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 right? And I'm watching that, and I said, this is all pure Gnosticism. It really is. It's Gnosticism in popular culture. And the more you think in these terms, the more you'll see it all around us. So there's the preference of the feminine over the masculine. Feminine virtues are always considered better, more noble, higher. Masculine virtues are base, foolish, unreliable. Thus you have, the chronic depictions of men as being dopey or stupid or foolish or klutzy or whatever have you. Think of the number of commercials you've seen. Think of Homer Simpson. I don't care who you think about. The external world is deceptive. You can't trust what you see. And there is a new age dawning. There is always this kind of this elusive new hope. It's coming. It's coming. Don't worry. It's coming. We're on the cusp of a new age. There's a rejection of the external word and structures. And so think of people saying, I'm spiritual but not religious. Right? It is kind of the American creed. I'm spiritual, but I'm not religious. That is a rejection of the external word and structures. And the God of the Old Testament is wicked. Why is he wicked? It's because he's male. It's because he created this world, and because he's the author of sin. So that's the nutshell Gnosticism. Okay? That's as simple as I can put it. I'm sorry. Any questions about that? Or any questions that I can answer? Let's put it that way. Yeah. Yes. Well, it's the God of the Old Testament. Right. Yes. Like the one we worship. Okay? The God of the first article, that guy. Yeah.
So can you have both forms of asceticism and libertinism in Gnosticism?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So sometimes it's like just the physical doesn't matter, so go have an orgy. And other times it's like the physical is evil, so asceticism. You deny all this stuff. Yeah.
Maybe Werfheim's book deals with this topic, but how did this philosophy survive without this mythology? Because most people have never heard of Pleromon, Monad, and all of that, and yet Gnosticism really is our American religion.
Yeah. Well, he actually does he charts it. He does a great job. He goes through people like Hegel and Jung. Jung was big into it. A lot of the kind of the influential people, they would kind of get in the back rooms and say, hey, this is pretty cool. And that's a great segue, because we're going to talk about two of them now. And one is Maria Montessori, and the other is Jean Piaget. Okay? So now Montessori, those of you who are teachers and went through a teacher's college, you're nodding your head at Montessori. So tell me everything you know about Montessori in 30 seconds or less.
I tried to get rid of most of that.
Okay.
So I just teaching false ideas. I think it's pretty prevalent today in the arts today, because the parents, dads are stupid, moms are trying to find themselves. The children are the only ones who know the truth because they see themselves. And I think it's prevalent in America.
Right. Yeah. And so there are over 4,000 Montessori schools. It dwarfs Lutheran schools, right? And Montessori schools are associated with caring, peaceful environments. Children learn what interests them at their own pace. I mean, who doesn't want that, right? Montessori method encourages children to make choices regarding what they learn, believing that what they learn best will interest them the most. Now, here's the trouble. How does a child know what they want to learn when they don't know what there is out there to learn? How's a child supposed to know the joy of learning Latin if they don't know if they don't know Latin exists?
And
Right.
that's the danger of teachers that don't know the truth, like you say, what they believe, teach, to confess.
Right. So she's also big on hands-on learning, activity-based learning. Instead of looking for the teacher for direction, children are encouraged to learn from their peers through collaborative play. So you're saying, well, is hands-on learning bad? Because Maria Montessori talked about it. Think of our diagram, that three-part thing that I charted out, and you'll see. So it can be bad if you start sifting out what we're trying to do. Now, Montessori herself, she wasn't a school teacher. She wasn't an educational professor. She was a doctor. She was a physician. I like to throw this out when the College of Ed says, you have no training in education. I said, well, neither did Piaget or Montessori or Dewey or Vygotsky. Oh, no, those don't count. Okay, so she believed that through careful observation of children, one could create the optimal learning environment. And so she used her quote-unquote scientific approach to devise child-centered approach of education in which the curiosity of a child was paramount. Okay, but now what she taught, believed, and confessed is what we're really interested in here, because that allows us to dissect what is and is not useful here. So in describing the spiritual development of children, Montessori referred to children as spiritual embryos or spiritual energies or divine energies. She used all three terms, right? From her point of view, these children were little gods or goddesses, or had the spark of gods and goddesses within them, and this divine nature had to be nurtured and brought out. What was holding them back was the confines of the world around them, because the world around them was evil. And we are on an evolutionary progress towards this new age. So Montessori, like so many in the early 20th century, is caught up in this optimism that we are all going to be advancing, and we are on the cusp of this new age of universal brotherhood and peace and love and goodwill and, you know, Bobby Sherman. I don't know who else. That dates me. Okay, if you don't know who Bobby Sherman is. We always used to say peace, love, and Bobby Sherman, right? Yeah, and so now how were we going to progress into this new age of this new spirituality and this new brotherhood? It was found in the children. The children were the ones who were going to usher in this age of global peace and tranquility. And so Montessori writes, it was Christ who showed us what a child really is, the adult's guide to the kingdom of heaven. It's not Christ who is the guide to the kingdom of heaven, or the way, the truth, and the life. It is the children who will bring in this new era of salvation. And for her, salvation is not seen as salvation from sin, everlasting death, and the power of the devil. For her, it is an earthly progression towards the new era in which people live in a selfless harmony without wars or conflicts. It's Gnosticism through and through. If one wanted to see God's plan of salvation being one worked out in the world, all you have to do is observe children, who, after all, were endowed with this divinity. And if you're dealing with little divine energies, who are you as a teacher to say to these little gods or goddesses, this is what you should learn? Rather, if they really are a god or a goddess, you should get out of their way, right? And let them learn and develop as they should be, free from this construct, this world that's been created by the demiurge. We have to get that out of the way because children are sinless, after all. She believed that the world had progressed so far because of divine workers in society. She wrote, "Our proud civilization and all the marvelous achievements of evolution have been made possible by the self-sacrifice of humble saviors of whose work we are unconscious." Now, how do you know that these children are these divine energies? By what scientific proof can you discern this? It is by the one who has been enlightened. Montessori. She is the enlightener of what the child's true nature is. And so you follow the Montessori method, right? Now, so is all hands-on work bad? Going back to our little diagram, you can see where many Christian pedagogues employed and encouraged hands-on methodology. They encouraged group work. In fact, I mentioned Trotzendorf yesterday, and Trotzendorf set up his whole school where the senior students were then became the teachers and the guides for the junior students, right? Now, this wasn't guiding them to some godhood, but rather it was entrusting the task of teaching to other students who were capable, knowing that as they taught, they themselves would learn the material better. So everything Montessori says isn't wrong. Is it wrong to have little chairs for little children? That's what she's credited with, along with Froebel and that sort of stuff. No, it's not wrong at all. Why? How do I know that? Well, because I can see that in Erasmus as well, who says the same exact thing. Erasmus, by the way, just give you an idea how advanced some of these guys were. Fetal alcohol syndrome. People say, well, they didn't know about fetal alcohol syndrome. Well, actually, yes, they did. And Erasmus warned against a woman drinking too much during pregnancy because this would impede the child's ability to learn later on. And she should be given the best of food during this time. Like, really? So, okay. Where am I at? Yeah, the teacher who gave unnecessary instruction and direction to children were in fact preventing their spiritual embryos from developing fully, thus hindering the advancement toward perfection and in turn preventing them from assuming their place in advancing this divine evolving plan for the cosmos. Okay? The world in which we have received is bad. Children are to be in touch with their true inner divine self, and there's an emphasis on the feminine qualities in Montessori. Sharing, nurturing, caring, rejection of authority is there, rejection of sin. It's all pure Gnosticism. Now, let's move on to my favorite, Jean Piaget. I don't say it just because he's French. How many Frenchmen does it take? Anyone from France here? Good. How many Frenchmen does it take to defend Paris? Don't know. It's never been done. In the military, we have 100 of them. You get one going, and then it'll just go back and forth. Okay. It's hard to overstate Jean Piaget's influence on the American educational landscape. Anyone who has done some educational theory has had to learn it. I had to learn it when I went to Concordia, Ann Arbor. We learned all about his stages of development there and how one progresses through its 4 stages of development. And I think Erikson takes it to 7 stages of development, Erik Erikson. And that's kind of what he's most known for. And no one can question Jean Piaget because all his work is scientific. It's evidence-based, it's research-based. Actually, most of his observations came from watching his own kids and saying, well, I think it's this way. So Piaget believed that children pass through 4 predeterminate stages of cognitive development in which, as they pass through these stages, they would construct their own knowledge and give meaning to the things around them. What is of interest is, for our discussion, for Piaget, is that knowledge did not come from outside, that is from a teacher, from an external source, from the Word. Knowledge came from inside, from the individual. It did not originate with God. It was not taught to students by teachers. Knowledge was constructed by the child, him or herself. Now, what's also interesting and what's incredibly underwritten about is Piaget's theological views. And Piaget wrote extensively about his theological views, and I suspect it's not talked about because it would be embarrassment to the psychological community to see what he wrote. Piaget saw God as immanent, involved in the lives of people, but only from within. He says, God is not a being who imposes himself on us from without. His reality consists only in the intimate effort of the seeking mind. It's important that Piaget doesn't deny the existence of God, nor does he say that it's only merely a product of a human imagination. He's not coming from it from a secular point of view. God doesn't indeed exist, but knowledge of him, his reality, his truth, where he is to be found, is found within. It's found actually in the biological mind. When Piaget came up with this idea, he thought it was revolutionary. In his old age, he says, I recall one evening a profound revelation, the identification of God with life itself, an idea that stirred me almost to ecstasy because it enabled me to see in biology the explanation of all things and of the mind itself. What is the nature of this God that he discovered? Piaget went back to a 17th century German philosopher, Leibniz, and Leibniz actually is known for his work in mathematics. He invented calculus. At least the Germans say he invented calculus. The English deny that. He was a rationalistic Lutheran who sought to come up with a more philosophically acceptable understanding of the nature of God. Where did he come up with that philosophical understanding of the nature of God? He went back to Gnosticism. And he maintained that the world was made up of an immaterial, divine-like being called monad. Piaget took this Gnostic concept of monad, and he openly credits Leibniz with opening his mind to that, and he married it to his desire to explain God in a quasi-scientific way. Now, some will argue that these were the theological views of Piaget's youth. And I've read articles where they say, yeah, well, he was just a young man when he wrote that stuff, and it really didn't have a bearing on his later stuff. However, not only did Piaget never repudiate them, but after gaining fame and notoriety for his child development theories, he repeatedly referenced his mystic and Gnostic understanding in his later work. In later work, Piaget praised the Gnostic Gospels, Gospels which the church had declared to be heretical. He said they were a truth which the Orthodox Church had deliberately suppressed. He rejected Christian teaching that men were sinful at birth, claiming that the Orthodox Church held to the error that a chasm separated humanity from its creator, end quote. For him, quote, the Gnostics contradicted this. They held that self-knowledge is knowledge of God, the self, and the divine, and they are all identical, end quote. In spite of these clearly Gnostic ideas, Piaget is held up as the work of a dispassionate social scientist, and yet, in spite of that, his theological views lie at the heart and core of his philosophy. And in fact, you can only understand this idea of child development through the lens of his theology. That theology is laced with Gnostic doctrines. The concept of God as monad, the rejection of God in favor of the God of creation in favor of evolution, the idea that children are advancing and developing towards their true ideal self, the advocacy of being spiritual but not religious, the rejection of vocation in favor of self-discovery, the advocacy that truth can be found by looking inward, the denial of original sin, the belief that we're on the cusp of a universal brotherhood. This is all Piaget, this is all Gnosticism. And like Montessori, how do you know that this whole child development theory is true? How does one know if a child has successfully developed into this mature biological mind? It is simply by following Piaget's own philosophy, by measuring where the child is according to Piaget's own stage of development. There's no scientific basis for saying this is where they are, except by using Piaget's chart and saying, oh, well, Piaget says they're here, therefore they must be there. It is here that Piaget reveals himself as a true Gnostic. He makes the audacious claim that he, and he alone, with scientific precision, knew the mind of a child and understood exactly how it developed. I have children. I don't know their mind at all. I have university students, and I really don't know their mind. Yeah, right. Sometimes I look back at them and I think, do you even have one? So, what are the implications? And this is where I want you to pull out some of those questions. What are some of the ways you see this stuff bubbling up in some of the material that you yourself has come across? I'll give you just a minute or two. You can talk about this at your tables. Well, you talk to yourself then and have those are the most fertile discussions I usually have, yes. Okay, if I could just call you back together. I know it's not a lot of time. And I'm not expecting you to have the answers to all three questions. I really just want those questions in front of you, so as we go through this, you're kind of thinking in those terms. So what are some of the observations that you came up with? Let's just start at that.
We talked about just the narcissism, just the rank of narcissism that we find in all facets of society, whether it's social media or anything else, because people are looking in on themselves.
Okay.
And brought up that the introverts and say that is turned in ourselves. This is basically just accepting that.
Right, and that's why it's so easily received. Yeah.
Not only is applying myself, that's a subjective journey, but then we subjectivize the criteria of whether or not I found myself. So ultimately, I determine whether I found myself. So the quest is subjective, and whether or not I found it.
Oh, sure.
Subjective. Everything's subjective.
Think of all the talk about having a faith walk or faith development. And think of the confirmation material that we come across and the catechetical material that we come across about this journey, this progress in faith. Anything here?
You talk about journaling, creative writing, that sort of thing.
Right. Which may or may not be bad.
But if the impetus behind it is thinking that the truth resides somewhere deep within you, and it just needs to come out, and if you write enough, eventually.
Correct, yeah. And so for my logic class, I once had them keep a journal, and it was they wrote down all the logical fallacies that they heard through the day. Was journaling bad? No. Except when they came back and told me all the logical fallacies of their parents. No. Honestly, it was like, okay, that was a bad idea. Let's keep going down the road. Anyone here? Anyone? Yeah, back.
I just made a comment that theology often gets secularized. People don't notice it. I think we have a sort of a secularized notion of Gnosticism too, which is that people's feelings are the final court of appeal. If you feel something very strongly, that's it. There can be no further discussion. It's sort of secularized, charismatic theology. Your feelings are the voice of God within you. But even people who are completely secular, that's their final court of appeal. It's how I feel. And that isn't originally, I think, is the religion of Gnosticism.
Right. So Dr. Manouche just talked about the centrality of feelings and how that becomes the guide for everything. Pastor Preuss, that was an excellent sermon on that. I'm sitting there thinking, good segue, right? Going along, anyone? Yeah?
We kind of veered off into other religions and like knowing the Mormon religion a little bit, having grown up there. There's a philosophy there that children don't sin early on, so that they're 9 years old. And when you mentioned the messenger of light, Joseph Smith, it just seems like it just keeps recycling itself into different religions and such.
Yeah. And what Pastor Preuss, number 2 over here said was it's just a natural thing. That's why it's so attractive. If anyone was in Pastor Preuss's number 3 on the myths, you'll see a lot of similarities in in mythology. Yeah.
And one more. And taking them into the educational system, Common Core, wants kindergartners to debate. And if you know kindergartners, even third graders, they debate based on emotions. And so, these kids get to express themselves without having the background of any kind of experience and knowledge. And you're supposed to listen to it.
Right. And I think this is, as teachers, you have a difficulty when you have to deal with parents. And you say, but I want my kid to be, have fun and to express themselves. And you say, well, they are expressing. Well, I'm teaching them what to express. And they say, no, that's not what I mean. And there's a real conflict you get when you bump against the parent or the board member, right? The board member who says, I don't want our classrooms to be so regimented. Okay, and what you're really bumping up against is this little bit of Gnosticism in the board member. So let's keep going down. Yeah.
I remember back in the 80s, there was a very popular book around education. It was called Values Clarification.
Right.
Presumed that the values the kids came to school with were not their own, so they could discard those and find something within themselves to bring forward as their own values.
Now, hold with that idea because you're going to see that same sentiment bubbling up, not here, just here, but when we get into Marxism, neo-Marxism, and socialism, you'll see that, and I'm going to scare the pants off of you. Well, wear a belt. Anything hit further down? Anyone else want to? Oh yes, okay. The wise men in the corner there, the wise guys.
Children's literature. This is also part of that. There's a very popular fantasy that a lot of kids like Philip Pullman, his Dark Materials. It's all based on this mythology, especially the demiurge, the idea that the Old Testament God is the bad guy, and that you have to get behind this oneness, one of the universe, which is just like a monad. But again, our kids are reading this, and I suspect it's in other children's literature also.
Yeah, and I think as teachers, especially if you're dealing in an ECE type environment, you'll find endless books that have these ideas embedded in them. The glorification of all the feminine virtues, the glorification of self, of discovery, right? Of being centered on self. And when you start looking at it, and I really would encourage you to read a good book on Gnosticism, you'll see it popping up all over the place and you go, ooh, I know that. So yeah, to summarize, how does it show up in modern educational material? The rise of the I feel culture, which we talked about yesterday. You know, I feel this, right? And I even tell my students, I don't care, or God doesn't care how you feel, right? God cares for you. And sometimes you feel God doesn't exist, and that doesn't change God one bit. So project-based learning as opposed to, or in opposition to direct instruction. And I think maybe that in opposition to is the thing. Project-based learning can be good if it is in support of direct instruction. Emphasis on student-led learning. Like, let's just find out what you want to learn about today. And catechesis being replaced by faith development. And this is really common. I went to Ann Arbor, Concordia Ann Arbor in the late 70s, early 80s, and we learned all about James Fowler and the faith development theory. And and Fowler is a universalist. And he just says faith is faith is faith, but, and here the thing is, faith is not the faith that is handed down to the saints. Faith is the personal feeling of spirituality. And it's the same for a Buddhist or a Muslim or a Christian. And the highest example of that, the one who attains the highest level, kind of keeping on that Piagetian level idea, was Gandhi and Jesus. Great. Okay. Gandhi, the one who ran around with women and slept with girls and boys. Okay. And Jesus. Okay. So tomorrow, the two guys I'm going to use as examples will be Lev Vygotsky, Comrade Vygotsky, and then his devotee, John Dewey. Okay? And we're going to look at Marxism, socialism, and liberal education.